Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Sailing the East podcast. I'm Bela and Mike.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
This is our podcast about sailing the east coast of the United States. Some of the episodes will focus on passages and destinations. In other episodes, we'll talk about boats, equipment, and techniques. And when we come across an interesting individual, we'll try to get them to be a guest on the show.
Now, what makes this podcast a little bit unusual is that only one of us sails.
That would be me, Bela. I've been sailing for over 30 years. Not across oceans, but on lakes and coastal cruising on the east coast of the United States.
And I, Mike, know very little about sailing. Honestly, I don't know the difference between a halyard and a line, so I ask most of the questions and Bela tries to answer. Now, Bela, it's been a few weeks since we've last chatted. What's going on in your part of the world?
Well, I will say, Mike, that the weather has really been hot and humid this summer. Too hot for me. It reminds me of when the kids were younger and my parents lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we'd go down there for a week in the summer to visit them, and it'd be, 90 degrees outside, and the humidity was about 90% also, and it was just miserable. And it seems like it's been that way a fair amount here in the Northeast and upstate New York this summer. It's been a bit hot. So that's been going on. And I think that's on the top of my mind because the last 4 or 5 days, we've had another one of these heat waves, which I think the weather folks say if you have 3 consecutive days of 90 degrees or more, they call it a heat wave around here, which we've had. The whole COVID Delta thing is sort of, still in the forefront here. It's been almost 2 years now with COVID, and where life is still back to normal. So that's sort of weird. I had always thought this would not last this long, but it seems to be hanging out. And hey, you must be getting ready to start back into the classroom soon, right? It's that time of year. It's end of August, and colleges start opening back up. What's going on in your place?
Well, we're on a little different schedule than the typical U.S. schedule. So our classes start kind of middle of October and go until the end of January. So I just finished grading exams and getting my grades turned in. And so we have a few weeks left still. We have orientations and things like that start, I think, the 3rd week of September, and it's here the end of August right now that we're recording this. So I have a little bit of a break, but not a ton of a break, but that's okay. The weather here has been interesting in Europe, Bela. This kind of the southern half of Europe has been like the U.S., very hot, and people might be following the news. There's been a lot of forest fires because it's very dry in Greece and Spain and things like this. And then kind of in the northern third where I am, it's been a real cool and rainy summer. It's been almost the opposite. So we've been in a kind of a typical, if you think about London in the winter, almost pattern. So it's in Fahrenheit, it's been in the mostly 60s and lower 70s and hasn't gotten too much hotter than that here. So pretty interesting.
Huh. Hey, Mike, let me ask you a question.
It's bad. Yep.
With the difference in academic schedules, right? You said you guys start sort of middle of October, go to the end of January for your fall semester or term. How do exchange programs work with U.S. universities, right? Because U.S. universities seem to be starting the last week in August, first week in September, finish before the Christmas holiday. So if you want to do an exchange program with the university, how does that stuff work?
It's a total hassle between the German schools that are on. Most of the universities are on the same schedule. There's a few that have shifted, but it's a big hassle. So what essentially happens is only semester exchanges happen in the spring or summer semester. So if you got done in December, right, like you would do in a U.S. university, we don't start until the middle of March. So students would come, they might come in January, but they wouldn't have classes until March. So maybe they would sightsee. Usually we have some early orientation types of programs and things, but the students don't have to show up until middle of March. Some of them work for a couple months in the U.S., save some money, and then show up in March. And then exams aren't done until the middle of July or the end of July in some cases. So the students would, and then maybe they would travel a little bit for a couple of weeks in August. And then if they're going to go start their semester again at the end of August, they have to go right back. So they kind of get their vacation in January and February, and they lose it in August, or in
Yeah.
June and July, they're still in school essentially.
Yeah.
So it's really a challenge. And in the fall semester, there is no exchange typically between German schools and U.S. schools. Some students are opting to do a full year. Some schools support that, and then that's easier to do a whole year. So what we wind up, I see more. We have these double degree programs where the students come for 1 whole year, 2 whole years, and that's easier than the semester exchange, which is a challenge with U.S. schools.
Yeah. Is all of Europe or all European universities on sort of the same academic schedule?
No, it shifts. At least, there are some differences, but Germany's really on this different schedule. And even within Germany, it varies by a few weeks here and there. But in Spain, at least the partner schools I've worked with, they're more on the U.S. schedule. France, I know some that do it both ways, so I'm not totally sure. Austria and Switzerland, I think, are on the German calendar, but it kind of depends.
Yeah.
Schools that tend to tilt more internationally, so a lot of them have adopted the more U.S. schedule, so some have shifted.
Yeah. Huh.
So you have to check carefully. Buyer beware. If you're interested in going on a semester exchange or you have a kid that's interested in this, make sure you take a look at these academic calendars.
Yeah.
It can make a difference.
That's a good point. All right. Should we get back to the whole paradox and sailing things?
Yeah. What's going on with your boat, Bela?
Well, in the last 2 weeks, I've been to the boat twice. Typically, I've been going every other week, but we had a little incident come up. So I was there for 6 days. I came home. I was home for 2 days, and then I kept reading about this hurricane. And I said, I better go back to the boat and get her ready. The first time I was there, the first week we were there, one of our sons and his wife have a new baby, and they live very close to the boat. So when we visit them, which has been really good this summer, we use Paradox as sort of our home base. So we don't intrude on them. They still have their space, and the crying baby doesn't wake us up. And my son's wife's sister was getting married. So they needed a babysitter for both the rehearsal dinner and the wedding. And it was really kind of funny because back when they told us, 12 months ago now, that they were pregnant, or maybe it was 9 months ago, and it was pretty cute because they said, yeah, we're expecting. So that was really exciting. It's their first child. And they said, oh, by the way, there's 3 days in August. Could you babysit for us? I said, well, the child's not even born yet, and already we have to reserve a date for babysitting. So that was kind of fun. So we went out there to babysit. So that's the first time they left the baby with anybody, and that was a lot of fun for us. And they had an event at their house, sort of a reception, because they've been rehabbing a house, and first time some of their family is from out west, had come here. So they had a little reception at the house, but they didn't want to have the baby there because of, COVID still sort of banging around, and they didn't want to expose the baby to that because, of course, the baby's not vaccinated. So they actually brought the baby to the boat. And while they had this reception at the house, and Elaine and I watched the baby on the boat. So that was kind of fun. And then Elaine went home on Sunday afternoon, and I stayed on the boat to fix some leaky windows, which will be another episode we're going to talk about. And I stayed there till Wednesday to do that. And then Hurricane Henri showed up and was heading for the East Coast and right towards Narragansett Bay were the early predictions. And I expected to hit on Sunday. So I got home on Wednesday morning, and then Friday morning I hopped back in the car and I drove out to the boat again to get her ready for the hurricane.
Wow. Bela, that's a little bit more excitement than I'm kind of interested in. But tell me, what's involved with getting the boat ready for a hurricane? Do you leave it in the water? Do you try to get it hauled out? What's the plan at something like this?
Well, every boat owner sort of has their own things that they feel about this. I should haul it out. I should not haul it out. I should leave it at a marina. I should go put it on a mooring ball because they're safer, or I should anchor out because that's safer. So everyone has their opinion. But what is telling to me is that my insurance policy and most insurance policies actually will reimburse you to haul the boat out when there's a named storm that's going to hit your area. So if there's a hurricane warning for your area where the boat is, for example, my insurance company will reimburse me up to $2,500 to haul the boat out. So, insurance companies are pretty good at looking at a lot of data and crunching the data. So that sort of tells me that the safest place to be when there's a hurricane for your boat is to have it on land. Because if they're willing to reimburse you and pay you that much money to get it out of the water, that sort of tells you that's the safest thing. So getting it out of the water is, a bit involved. And
how does that work? I mean, it seems like there's lots of people that would want to get it hauled out in a very short amount of time. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if you remember a few weeks ago, we actually, episode 33, we talked about Tropical Storm Elsa that was sort of heading up into the region. And I went out and I did some prep for the boat then. Or actually, I think I was there, and we were actually there for that storm. That's right, because that was in episode 33. And there was sort of like very little stuff going on at the marina because it wasn't hitting. By the time it got to where we were, it was a tropical depression, and so it really didn't merit the amount of hurricane prep. It wasn't a hurricane, although Henri was a hurricane. So when I got to the marina, man, was it a beehive of activity! Oh my gosh, and so you put your name on the list at the marina. You call the marina up and say, "Hey, I want to get my boat hauled." Right? Because it takes about an hour per boat to haul it. Because if you remember, there's this big mechanism, big machine called a travel lift that you drive the boat over into this area. They can put these big straps under the boat. They can lift the boat up. This travel lift has wheels on it. They can move it to an area in the parking lot. They put it on some stands, and then they go back and get another boat. This marina actually has 2 travel lifts and a crane. So they actually have 3 different ways that they can be lifting boats out of the water. And it was the first time I saw nobody in the office, and all of the folks who, are usually sitting behind desks in the office were out in the yard helping haul boats. And they hauled about 25 boats a day is what their sort of capacity was. There's probably 350 boats in the marina. So that tells you not everybody gets hauled. So I'm trying to figure out sort of what the prioritization is on hauling boats. I think part of it is if you get your name on the list or not, right? If you tell them you want to get hauled. And then number 2, I think it's sort of the size of the boat, the type of the boat, and where the boat's located in the marina. Because I think to some extent, some parts of the marina are more exposed than other parts of the marina. So they want to haul the boats that are more exposed and the boats that are bigger, because the bigger boats have more windage, meaning they have more surface area for the wind to blow against. And if the wind blows hard enough, either the boat will break loose, which means it's going to blow into other boats and other parts of the marina and cause damage, or the dock will break loose because there's so much force on it from these boats being tied to the dock. So I think it's this complicated process they go through of, deciding, okay, we're going to haul out the boats that have a lot of windage, that are located in the more windy parts of the marina, because they actually took some of the bigger boats that they didn't get time to haul out, and they moved them into other areas and slips that were open because there was less wind. There was less wind there, right? It's a little more protected. So there's not only are they hauling boats out, but there's this shuffling of boats going on. So it was a pretty busy place for a few days, about as busy as I've seen the marina.
So, okay, you're going to then buckle down and you're going to stay put. What do you do to the boat when you realize that's not going to get hauled out?
Yeah. I had myself on the list to get hauled out, but I did not get hauled out. So it was pretty clear that I was pretty far down on the list. And there's a lot of, kind of big cabin cruisers that are almost 3 stories tall. So they hauled actually very few sailboats. They hauled a lot of these big cabin cruisers that, again, have a lot of windage. They hauled very few sailboats. So it didn't look like I was going to get hauled. So so there's a lot of work. So here's what I did. And all of these things I did myself because I was there solo. Although there was 3 boats, three of us in a row, all next to each other, and we sort of helped each other do a couple things. So it made it fun and easy. There was three parties there, kind of working on their boats. The first thing you sort of do is or at least what I did, was you try to take off everything on the boat that causes windage. So I have a Dodger in the front of the boat. It's like a big windshield type of thing that's made out of canvas and clear plexiglass. I remove that, and then I have some what are called biminis over the cockpit of the boat, which help protect you from the sun. So, remove those. They come off pretty easy. They snap on and on with some zippers. The sails on my boat roll up like a window shade. And so even though they roll up like that, one of the things that can happen is if something gets loose in a high wind, they can unroll themselves, which would be disastrous to have a boat tied to a dock with its sail flapping around in, 40-knot gusts. So I remove those sails, which is not too difficult, but, it's a big sail and it's a handful to kind of get down. Luckily, the days I was working on it were literally the calm before the storm. There was like no wind at all, which made kind of removing the sails easy. And then the other thing I did was actually where my boat sits, it's stern to the dock, meaning I back it into the dock because my boat has a pass-through stern, so it's very easy to walk from the dock onto the boat. The prevailing wind is from the south, and also that's where the majority of the heavy wind was predicted to be for this storm, and that's also where the marina is most exposed, is from the south. So I actually turned the boat around so it faced into the prevailing wind. So now the bow is pointing into the prevailing wind and not the stern. So the boat will ride waves better that way, and there's less windage because instead of a blunt transom, a blunt back end of the boat, the stern, I have the bow of the boat sort of into the wind.
It makes perfect sense. So basically anything that might flap around and anything that might catch wind is down, is under, is below decks, right?
Yeah.
And you've got this thing facing the wind, so it cuts there's the least amount of resistance. So you've done everything you can, but how do you do anything extra to tie it to the dock? I mean, it seems like there's a lot of force still.
Yeah, there is. So what I do is I double up all of my dock lines. So normally when the boat's there, two lines at the front of the boat that go to the dock, 2 lines at the back of the boat that go to the dock, and then I have some what are called spring lines, which are lines that tie to the middle of the boat at the sort of the widest part of the boat, and one goes forward to the dock and one goes to the rear part of the dock, or the rear part of the boat but attaches to the dock. Those are called spring lines. So I doubled all of those up, and so I had twice the number of ropes or lines holding the boat. And you put what's called chaff protection on them. One of the things that happens with lines is the constant wave action, the big wave action you get in a storm, is the boat's bouncing up and down, and these lines rub against each other, or they rub against the dock, and they wear through. And that's most of the times what happens with lines or ropes is they don't snap under tension, but because of this friction of rubbing, they wear through. So I have some old pieces of hose that I use for chafe protection, and you kind of wrap those around the pieces of your line where they rub against each other or they're rubbing against the boat or the dock, so that it's this piece of rubber hose that's rubbing and not my line, not my dock line. So that's one thing I did. So I doubled up all the lines. And I also have fenders. Fenders are the bumpers that you use to keep your boat from banging against the dock. I have a couple of extras that I typically don't use, so I put all the fenders I own were deployed around the boat. On the dock is only on one side of the boat. The other side is some space and then another boat, and so I put fenders on, protect me from the other boat. And also, I deployed all my fenders on the side where the dock is.
Because you're really at the mercy of other people, right? I mean, you can do everything you can to make sure your boat is secure, but you can't do anything if somebody else's boat breaks free and runs into yours, right?
Yeah, that was interesting because there was, again, the place was a beehive of activity. Some boats getting hauled. The boats not getting hauled, probably about a third of them to maybe half of them, people were there prepping them for the storm. But there was a good pile of boats where you saw no one, nothing got done. It was just all the canvas, all the canvas was left up. Everything was, now, who knows? Maybe those people are away. They don't have time to come here. I don't know what the story is, but I was surprised at the number of boats basically had zero prep done to them.
That's a big investment to leave unprotected.
Yeah. And you're right. Because what happens is typically, whether your boat is in an anchorage, you're anchored out, or whether the boat's on a mooring ball, or whether you're in a marina, a boat breaks loose, right? And then once you have a loose boat, and if you remember in a hurricane, the winds shift direction because a hurricane spins counterclockwise. So as it passes over you, the winds typically go from one direction to the opposite direction at some point in time. And so if it's blowing things in if a boat breaks loose and it blows it one direction, an hour later or 2 hours later, it might take it and blow it in the opposite direction. So it's sort of like a pinball going back and forth in the marina. And that's what really causes a lot of damage.
Interesting. Now, I remember we were talking about shore power and things like that. Do you stay plugged in during a hurricane, or do you unplug from shore power? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, good question. So, I stay plugged in, and here's the reason why. So the boat has bilge pumps in it, right? So the bilge is the lowest part of the boat. If any water comes into the boat, that's where the water drains to naturally, just because of the shape of the boat and the hull. And there's a pump down there. There's actually two pumps down there that have automatic switches on them that if the water gets in there, it pumps the water out. There's a small pump and a big pump. And they run off batteries. They run off the house batteries on the boat. And so I want to leave the boat plugged in so that the battery charger keeps the batteries fully charged, so that if water does get into the boat somehow, the bilge pumps will turn on and pump the water out. Now, of course, you have the challenge of in a storm, the electricity can go out in the area, and then you're relying on your batteries. But I have enough battery capacity that the bilge pumps can run for a pretty long time before they'll drain the batteries, because that's fundamentally the only thing that's turned on when I leave the boat is the bilge pumps.
Interesting.
So, but yes, so the general consensus is stay plugged in.
Interesting.
Right?
All right, so you did kind of everything you felt like you could do. You headed out. What happened? What happened in from your local area? I know the storm was pretty bad in some places, but what did it look like from where your boat was lying?
Yeah, well, so then the other decision we got to make, before I dive into that, the other decision you got to make is, do you stay on the boat or not?
Right? Oh, come on. Really? People stay on the boat in a hurricane?
Yeah, there's plenty of people who do.
Wow.
Yeah, so I did not. I figure, if it's so bad that the wind is howling at 40, 50, 60, 70 miles an hour, the docks are going to be bouncing up and down. If I was on the boat and I had to get off the boat, I couldn't. I couldn't walk down the dock if it's bouncing up and down 4 or 5 feet.
What's the rationale for staying on the boat? Is it like something happens, you can try to fix it, or
the same? Same rationale. People don't evacuate in a hurricane on land.
Wow.
Right. There's some thinking that, hey, I can help protect my property. Right. If something happens, goes wrong, I can fend off another boat. I can do something. But for me, it's like I was not on the boat. Right. And to each his own. I respect people who stay. And there was, a handful of people who stay. Now, there are some people who live on their boats at the marina.
Right. That and I get that. That might be a little different story.
Right. They had no other place to go unless they were going to get a hotel. And some of them did.
Stay with family.
So there are a couple of folks that I know who lived there during the summertime on their boats, and they left their boat and either got a hotel room or they moved in and crashed on someone's couch. Right. Yeah. But there were people who stayed on their boats. But my feeling is if it's that bad that my boat's breaking loose, what am I going to do? Right. I can't. Yeah. I can't do anything. So anyway.
Yeah. Not worth dying for. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, so the timing of the storm, right? So the timing of the storm was supposed to hit Saturday night. And it was interesting. They were hauling boats till about 3 or 4 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, and then they stopped because the wind started picking up more and more. And you can imagine you can't have a big boat hanging off of a crane if the winds are blowing too hard. So they stopped hauling boats around 3. I had finished doing everything. I left around 3 o'clock. The wind was picking up. The good news is all is good, right? The boat survived. The marina survived. I don't think any boats broke loose. I didn't see any damage at the marina when I went back there a few days later. Actually, Jason, my son, who lives close by, not Jason, Andrew. Oh my gosh, hope he's not listening. I confused my 2 kids. My son, Andrew, who lives close by, stopped by Sunday night after the storm had sort of passed and called me up and said, hey, the boat's all fine and looks like everything survived okay. So that all turned out pretty good.
Interesting. Well, that's a big relief. It would have been, I know you have insurance and everything, but even so, you don't want anything bad to happen, especially after you spent so much time in the last year getting this boat out on the water. It must be a little bit nerve-wracking, right, at home, watching the weather reports, I would imagine. Yeah, or do you just put it out of your mind? No,
it was nerve-wracking, right? No. It was nerve-wracking. And these hurricanes are always interesting, right? So now I'm really paying attention. I used to sort of superficially pay attention. And Henri kind of danced around a little bit. Originally, it was going to go to the east of where the boat is. It was going to go to the east of Narragansett Bay. So that's kind of good because if you the way hurricanes work is the winds rotate counterclockwise, and if you draw a circle and divide the circle into 4 quadrants, the sort of quadrant between noon and 3 o'clock, that upper right-hand quadrant, that's the quadrant of the high winds in a hurricane. That's where the most of the wind is. The strongest winds are there. And the quadrant kind of between 9 p.m. and midnight or 12 is sort of the heavy rain quadrant. So depending upon which way the hurricane shifts, left to right or east to west in this case, can make a pretty significant difference in the wind, right? Because and the reason it's that quadrant from noon to 3 is the high wind, because you have the wind of the hurricane plus you have the speed of the hurricane itself. So if the hurricane is moving at 25 miles an hour towards the north and the winds are blowing counterclockwise, this quadrant between noon and 3, let's say the winds and the hurricane itself are 100 miles an hour, but to that you have to add the speed of the hurricane itself. So you add another 25 miles an hour to the wind, so they're 125 miles an hour there, right? Whereas on the other side, you subtract the 25 miles an hour, right? So anyway, this hurricane kept dancing around. So first it looked like it was going to go more towards Cape Cod, which means, okay, less wind for us. And then each day as it got closer, it kept moving further and further west. And then it looked like it was quite a bit farther west of us, almost going to hit New York City. And said, oh, okay, now it's far enough away that we're in sort of the outer bands of the high wind. And then it starts shifting back. And the closer it got, and the time came, it shifted closer and closer. And I think it went right over Narragansett Bay. So we had a direct hit of the hurricane, so to speak. But the good thing is that it sort of got downgraded pretty quickly as it got close. So a Category 1 hurricane, the winds are between 74 and 95 miles per hour. And a tropical storm is 39 to 73. So I think we got downgraded from a Category 1 to a tropical storm, but the winds were still in the 70s, right? So it's still blowing pretty good. And the other thing you really worry about is not just the wind, but it's what's called the storm surge, right? So because of all this wind, it kind of blows the water in one direction. So again, this quadrant of the hurricane between noon, between 12 o'clock and 3 o'clock, because it's spinning counterclockwise, there's a lot of water that gets pushed up there. And that's the storm surge. That's what causes the storm surge, is this wind that's just pushing this water for hours and hours. And the way the marina works, and this is one thing that happens at a lot of marinas, the docks at our marina are floating docks, which means they float, right? Tide goes up and down, docks float, but they float on these big telephone poles, as I describe them. So they're attached to these telephone poles that are driven into the ground. And the telephone poles are only so high. And if the storm surge gets higher than sort of, the telephone pole height, the docks just float loose. So the timing of the hurricane is important, right? If the storm surge hits at high tide, right? So at a normal high tide, there's probably, I would say, 8 to 10 feet of free telephone pole, And so if you have a 10-foot storm surge hitting at high tide, and it was actually full moon, which is an extra high tide, the whole dock can float loose. And that's happened in the past in, hurricanes in parts of the country where the whole marina just floats away. And it doesn't float away gently because it's blowing pretty good. But anyway, it looked like the storm surge was only going to be 3 to 5 feet. And so we weren't really worried about that.
Yeah, I never thought about that, because I know about the storm surge, and that's what causes all the flooding, right? And when there's big problems with that. But I never thought about it that flooding would also be enough to cause the whole marina to break free from the moorings.
Right.
Wow. So that didn't happen, luckily.
Luckily that didn't happen.
So given all this, what do you think's the best approach? I mean, to stay in the marina like you did, or to go out to a mooring ball somewhere, or I know some people get on their boats and they try to go far enough away and just drop the anchor and ride it out. Having gone through what you just went through, what's your pick for next time? Because we know there'll be a next time, right?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mike. And I really don't know. The outside of right where the marina is, we're in this cove, or bay. There's a bunch of mooring balls there, and there were a bunch of boats on moorings. And the boats stayed there on moorings. I mean, people were out there prepping their boats, right? They were doing things. Now, the disadvantage of being on a mooring, from my perspective, is you can't plug in the shore power.
Right.
So keeping your batteries charged up nice and full in case, you get a significant leak of some sort is a challenge. But, all the boats on the mooring balls were still there the following day. So I really don't know. I feel pretty good with the boat at the marina. I got shore power. I'm plugged in. But, there's other people who swear the best place to be is on a mooring ball. Now, there were a few boats in the marina that on Saturday morning left. I don't know where they went, right? But they clearly left the marina. And they were big boats, so they weren't being put on a trailer to be hauled out, right? I mean, they were going someplace. So they decided And they were all motorboats. They weren't sailboats, so they could go pretty fast. So they were clearly going to go someplace and hide or try to get out of the path of the storm. But, of course, the problem with these damn storms is they dance around a little bit. I mean, our predictions are good, but they're not, they're good 4 hours before it's going to hit. But 24 hours before it hits, it could shift 50 miles one way or another. And certainly on a sailboat, I can't travel very far. So, yeah, I don't really know what the best place to be is. I think I'm going to stay at a marina. I'm in a marina. And, if I can get hauled out, that's great. And if I can't, I'll take my licks at the marina. It's a pretty new marina. The docks are nice and sturdy. Everything's well maintained. The telephone poles are nice and tall, So I think that's probably the safest place to be. And if the storm is so bad that, the docks are going to break loose or the storm surge is so high that the marina is going to float away, I don't think, regardless of where I was, there's going to be carnage.
Yeah. Screwed no matter what, I think, right?
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, what do you think? Should we wrap it up?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that was sort of an interesting experience. My first real hurricane experience. And again, I didn't stay on the boat, but just sort of getting it ready and getting it all secure, and then sort of walking away from it saying, okay, I've done everything I can. Now it's up to Mother Nature to see what happens. That was sort of an interesting new experience for me.
Yeah, and then holding your breath and listening to the weather reports.
Right. Yep.
Wild.
Yep.
Well, I guess we'll file this under all's well that ends well, I think is today's summary. But listeners, thanks for joining us for another episode. We hope you found this conversation interesting and thought-provoking. As usual, if you have questions about what we've discussed, feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is sailingtheeast, that's all one word, at gmail.com.
Yeah, and if you enjoy the podcast, hit that follow button on your favorite podcasting application. And hey, if you'd like to support the podcast, at the bottom of the show notes, you will notice a link that says support this podcast. Click on the link and you can make a pledge of as little as 99 cents a month to help defer the cost of producing the show. Hey, we'll be spending the rest of the summer sailing around Narragansett Bay, Long Island Sound, Buzzards Bay. Actually headed out to the boat later today to hope to see you out on the water. Look for the sailing boat paradox. So until next time, signing off. See you soon.
Sounds great, Bela. Safe sailing, and that's it from over here in Münster, Germany. We'll see you next time.